So Vessel of Hatred not only brought about quite a few new systems, but it's also been quite overlooked how many changes have come to the old systems as well. So in today's video, I'm going to go over 9 things that I wish I knew going into Vessel of Hatred and to help you go into Torment 1 and beyond as quickly as possible. And for tip number 1, I'm actually going to go through some of the major milestones and checkpoints you want to focus on and progress through to help you get into higher tiers of Torment difficulties, starting with item power. So this is more of a given and kind of what you need as a minimum to get into Torment 1, and that's to ensure that most if not all of your pieces of gear are at least 700 to 750 item power, especially your weapon, because item power directly correlates with weapon damage, so it's extra important. Next, another efficient way to boost your damage or even survivability is to get higher rolls on your aspects. And of course, you want to first of all collect those aspects that you'll need for a viable build too. And because the ranges on the rolls of aspects, legendary aspects, and also unique items too, by the way, are really great, sometimes finding the same unique or the same legendary aspect can still give you a great boost because you're getting a much higher multiplier. A great way to farm this is to use the Mercenary Bartering system, the Purveyor of Curiosities, which is a gambling system, and also Hell Tides are quite good as well. Next, you'll definitely want to use Tempering to give you a big power spike, especially going through the next Torment tiers, right? So you definitely want to temper your items because it's also quite cheap to do so in terms of the resources. And next, another way to get a significant power spike is to unlock legendary Paragon nodes. And of course also the glyph nodes, but the significant chunk of power from the glyphs mostly comes from upgrading the radius of it, and you usually not get to that until say like Torment 2 or so, and you'll actually be fine before you do that. But essentially with your points while just leveling up your character, by investing into legendary Paragon nodes, you'll be gaining extra multipliers on your damage too, which is a great way to power up too. Next, onto defensives. You obviously want to make sure that you have enough armor and resists per Torment tier, and now for each Torment level that you increase the difficulty by, there's actually a greater penalty on the amount of armor and resist that you have. And so you want to get to 1000 armor and close to, if not max resist, throughout each Torment tier. And to do that, you often want to prioritize, and this is kind of a change in Vessel of Hatred 2 compared to before, you want to prioritize more defensive affixes on your gear. Namely, you want to actually actively roll certain armor rolls on your gear, even resist rolls, and armor percentage affixes as well to help you boost that up. And for another sort of bonus tip, right here the Mercenary actually has a passive ability to also boost your armor by 15% if you're sort of needing something to reach that 1000 armor. Next, another thing that you should definitely not neglect is to upgrade your gems frequently, because another change that's come to Vessel of Hatred is that gem fragments are, compared to before, dropping a lot more and in much greater amounts. Of course, there's like a new tier of gems too, but to get to the previous highest tier Royal, it's actually quite easy to farm those up now and deck out your gear with Flawless or Royal gems. And so by doing that, you'll be getting a huge primary stat boost and also a resist or armor boost on your jewelry, right, if you need that. And another tip that I have is usually you want to use 2 items for your rune words, right? So that's like 4 sockets. But what some people have been doing is to use one of the rune words in your weapon, which then frees up an armor slot to put in primary stat, right? Because oftentimes the primary stat gained, or the amount of damage you gain from, instead of having the rune word in that armor piece, putting it in your weapon, the primary stat gain from the gems is actually very, very significant too. And of course, you just want to keep all of these aforementioned things in mind as you keep progressing your character, and also adding in things like leveling up your glyphs, of course, and increasing your radius, increasing your Paragon level, of which there are a lot more now in Vessel of Hatred, getting more legendary nodes, certain greater affixes, and min-maxing those, and of course, masterworking. And if you spread out progress amongst all of these things, ultimately, given their somewhat multiplicative nature, you'll be powering up a lot more towards the end, and ultimately into Torment 4. And all that was actually still technically tip number 1, and I realized I've covered quite a bit already, but the rest of the 8 tips are actually just quick ones to help you progress a little bit faster and just things to like look out for. So with that, onto tip number 2, and that is to be sure to level up your mercs or your mercenaries fairly evenly to unlock the most bartering options possible. Also, technically, it kind of depends on the specific type of, say, legendary cache or aspects that you want to focus on. But generally speaking, it would be really good to level up all of your mercenaries to report level 8 to unlock all of the bartering options that are available. Oh, and of course, don't forget to use the free bartering inventory refresh. I think it's once a day or once every so hours. But again, the more options you unlock, whenever you refresh, it also increases the efficiency, so to speak, of that refresh, right? Because you're getting that many more items basically twice over. So that just gives you way more options. And on to tip number 3, and that is to not miss the new Legion events, because the monster density and the experience gain is actually insane, especially if you're still on your way to unlocking additional Paragon boards, of course your legendary glyphs and so forth, say pre-Paragon level 150. Doing this is actually a great way to gain a few Paragon levels within one event. So of course, Legion events weren't really important before Vessel Hatred because leveling sort of stops very early on into the season, but now with leveling sort of being an ongoing thing, a lot more importance has come back to these Legion events. And on to tip number 4, and I think this is a pretty underrated tip, and that's that, of course, while you want to be doing the Realmwalker events to ensure that you always have these obols on you to have like the drop buff and also experience buff, but also you want to be sure to check the timer of the event whenever you're looking to hop in. I found that if the timer is pretty close to ending for the Realmwalker event, say it's like 3 or 4 minutes before the end, oftentimes when I go to the zone, the Realmwalker has already been killed, and the map doesn't actually mark where the portal is because of course the Realmwalker will walk around that area, right? So unless you're there to follow the Realmwalker around and know where the portal drops, it's often quite hard to locate the actual portal on your map if you don't do that. And I've actually wasted so much time just like trying to get in the last few minutes thinking that, oh, I didn't have to like go through the whole process of killing the Realmwalker and thinking I would save time to just be able to hop into the portal that way, but it actually sort of backfired a few times because I couldn't actually even find the portal, right? So I would suggest hopping in only if there's like 5 or more minutes left or even like longer left to the event, or even around when the event first starts to ensure that you'll be able to get the portal. And moving on to tip number 5, and that is that Whispers were actually buffed and that they have a much higher, in my experience at least, unique drop rate, and they actually kind of just drop more stuff, including the very valuable Infernal compasses. So they're one of the few ways that you can get these Infernal compasses, and there are also different ways to get Whispers quite easily, including the new Realmwalkers. That's kind of a quick and easy way to score 5 Whispers at once. Of course, you also have world bosses, which often comes attached to Whispers too. So these two you definitely want to knock out whenever there are Whispers attached to them. Next, of course, Hell Tides are always attached to Whispers too. So that's another easy way. Even certain bosses, I believe, say even like Uber Lilith, which isn't quite necessarily like super hard anymore, especially if you go to like lower difficulties, say like Torment 1, I think. And of course the PvP zone Whispers, especially the Seething Abomination Whisper, can be an extremely efficient way to fill the bar. And moving on, the Purveyor of Curiosities, which of course is the gambling vendor, was also buffed in a way where I think they not only have like a higher legendary drop rate, but they also have a much higher unique drop rate compared to before too. And for yet another tip attached to this is that once you progress through the seasonal battle pass and unlock the cinders where you'll be upgrading various perks in the season, you want to make sure to get the perk where you get additional chances at dropping items whenever you gamble an item. So like it actually gives you a chance to kind of crit a gamble where 2 items instead of 1 will be given to you at once, right? So if you can, try to save at least some obols for when you actually unlock that perk and level up that perk to have a more efficient and effective time with gambling. And next up, I touched on the Infernal Hordes, the keys dropping from, say, Whisper caches and other sources. The Infernal Hordes are actually a great way to not only get additional legendaries, say to upgrade your aspects, but also to have a chance of getting more ancestral legendaries, which is always helpful, and of course ancestral unique sometimes even. And another sort of overlooked tip for this is that now the tiers are based on whatever torment level or difficulty level that you select. So some people would assume that all the keys are the same as a result for the Infernal Hordes, but there's actually some different types of keys that give you different numbers of waves. So of course, you'll generally want to prioritize the keys that have a higher wave count, because by doing that, you'll be stacking up more boons and banes within each run, and also getting a lot more of those like cinders, right? To then exchange for rewards at the end. So far I've seen a 10 wave version and a 6 wave version, so whenever you get the 10 wave key, you definitely want to prioritize that. But in general, Infernal Hordes are just a very efficient way. I would probably just use those over your Nightmare Dungeon keys to get your masterworking materials in addition to all the aforementioned gear drops too, because they tend to drop lots of masterworking materials if you can get a good run. And moving on for the next tip, the season journey this time is arguably even more helpful than the previous season journeys, which have already been quite good. And that especially now, Ancestrals are a lot harder to get, right? And they also come attached with at least a guaranteed greater affix, so they're extremely valuable. And by completing Chapter 4 and Chapter 5, you get guaranteed, albeit random, ancestral legendaries and uniques. Not to mention the huge influx of boss summoning materials, which will be really good for higher torment tiers to farm your bosses with. So I would definitely highly recommend doing and prioritizing chapters 4 and 5, and even spend some of your existing boss materials to summon the bosses just to progress the season journey. Even on like Torment 1, I think is still very much worth it. But at the same time, aside from using your boss materials to clear parts of the season journey, I wouldn't really spend them or overspend them on Torment 1, but instead save your boss materials for Torment 2 or even Torment 3 and above to then have that higher chance of getting those ancestral legendaries and uniques, right? Because boss materials can kind of be a scarce resource, and you definitely want to save them for the more efficient runs later on. And last but not least for tip number 9, and that is to remember to somewhat do your new Nahantu Renown. And just by doing the campaign, which of course is mandatory, you'll be unlocking a little bit of this. But if you just knock out a few dungeons, say even Nightmare Dungeons, do a couple of the new strongholds, and of course try to knock out some of the new Tenets of Akret, and even do a few of the new side quests, which generally are quite easy even though the rewards aren't great. By getting to at least level 3 of the Nahantu Renown, you actually unlock a whopping 2 skill points, which is actually massive for your character's power. And then beyond that, it's a little less important, but on tier 4 you get 4 additional Paragon points, which can still make a difference too. So you definitely want to remember to do that, and especially the Tenets of Akret, which are the replacement or like the new type of Statues of Lilith, if you're familiar with that. They're basically clickable markers around the new zone that are in fixed places, so there are already maps online for that. So you can simply look at those maps and just go to exactly where these Tenets of Akret are to unlock some free renown. And even better, while doing some side quests or even like Hell Tide whenever there's a Hell Tide and things like that for higher efficiency. And those are 9-ish, actually more than 9 tips to help you progress efficiently and quickly through the especially higher difficulty tiers of the Vessel of Hatred and Season 6. Let me know if I missed anything or if you have any additional tips that you would like to add, and I'll definitely reply to your comments as well. Anyhow, thank you so much for watching, consider subscribing to my channel for more cutting edge tips, and I will catch you in the next one. Happy hunting. Peace.